My name is Bailey Thomas, and I'll be giving an informative speech on the birth of rock and roll. If you don't know the blues, there's no point in picking up the guitar and playing rock and roll or any other form of popular music. Wise words of Keith Richards. The guitar and the blues is what started it all. The first electric guitar was invented in 1948 by Clarence Leo Fender. In 1948, the 12-inch record was also introduced. The 12-inch record allowed us to record up to 20 minutes of music rather than just one song. This also allowed people to base their opinions on groups or individuals on their albums rather than just a single. The 50s was the perfect opportunity to introduce rock and roll. That is because in 1945, World War II ended, and people were looking for a sense of happiness and relief after such a rough time. Alan Freed was a disc jockey who promoted up-tempo rhythm and blues music. He wanted to go above and beyond his traditional R&B audience, so he decided to cross music styles such as jazz, boogie, blues, gospel, R&B, vocal groups, and country, and categorize them as rock and roll. This was a creation of a new sound that opened the ears of white and black teenagers, and this helped block off segregation. The first true rock and roll song was Crazy Man Crazy by Bill Haley and the Comets. This hit number 12 on the popular charts in 1953. Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets hit number 1 nationwide on the popular charts in 1955. Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel hit the charts in 1956. He was also the first artist that year to have 9 singles in the Hot 100. In 1957, more artists appeared on the pop charts, and in 1959, 43% of the rock and roll records were sold. February 3rd, 1959 was the day that the music died. This was a tragic plane crash that killed Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richards, also known as the Big Hopper. The end of Chuck Berry, Frank Sinatra, and Doris Day continued newer generations of rock and roll. Rock and roll is still thriving today because it is not just a genre of music, it is a culture. It changed social life completely, made the economy increase, and influenced many other genres of music. Today I will discuss the influence of rock and roll on social life, the economy, and genres of music. Rock and roll comes from Trixie Smith's single, My Man Rocks Me with One Steady Roll, recorded in 1922. This song meant sex. No one said it better than Rick James. You can't have rock and roll without drugs. You can't have rock and roll without sex. Rock and roll was so scandalous because it talks about subjects that you normally wouldn't talk about in music during this time, such as sex, drugs, and hardships. It was also very provocative. An example of this would be Elvis Presley's dance moves. The fashion changed completely. For example, the Beatles had very long hair. Once teenage boys saw that the Beatles were famous and were getting a lot of attention from females, they decided that they didn't want to cut their hair short anymore. This long hair tradition kept on going through the 80s when hair bands were introduced, such as Def Leppard, Kiss, and Poison. The roles of women were changed too. People like Janis Joplin and Aretha Franklin made it clear that the roles that society put on women were not going to be tolerated in the rock and roll culture. The same thing goes for African Americans. Prince and Jimi Hendrix made it very clear. Rock and roll is the hamburger that ate the world, Peter York once stated. Not only were DJs, record labels, and concert promoters booming with business, but companies used music to advertise everything from makeup to vehicles. A great example of this would be Alice Cooper in a Staples commercial, while his single School's Out was recorded in the background. Another example would be We Are the Champions by Queen on a Viagra commercial. The Hard Rock Cafe is a place where you can go and eat with your family, but it was promoted by rock and roll because it has t-shirts and autographs and everything that the rock and roll culture provides. MTV programmed 300 U.S. TV cable systems in 1981. In 1983, 2,000 of MTVs were programmed. In 1984, VH1 was also programmed. Music videos was a 24/7 marketing tool. Once people realized that rock and roll was not just a phase, they decided to use it for their own profit. Neil Young made a clear point: rock and roll is here to stay. Rock and roll influenced other genres of music, such as rap. NWA was an 80s rap group that was very rebellious from what society wanted them to be. They grew up in a hard place, and so society said that they were also going to be going through hard times. But they decided to go against that, and that's what rock and roll is all about. Rock and roll was about rebellion. Rock and roll also influenced new bands and new music that we listen to today, such as 21 Pilots, the Arctic Monkeys, the Black Keys, the Front Bottoms. There is even a band called Greta Van Fleet. They are a newer band, and they have the style of Led Zeppelin. They sound exactly like Led Zeppelin. There are also different forms of rock and roll. We have hair bands, heavy metal, indie, grunge. Nirvana and Metallica are both rock and roll, but they are two different types of rock and roll. Nirvana is grunge and Metallica is more heavy metal. Every genre of music was influenced by rock and roll in some way, whether it was their lyrics, their music style, their fashion, or their slang. Rock and roll has offered so much to the table. It changed our social life, boosted our economy, inspired so many more artists to make music that would ring our ears. As generations went on, rock and roll grew. I am going to end this with a wonderful quote by Vera Nazarian. If music is a place, then jazz is the city, folk is the wilderness, rock is the road, classical is the temple.